Under the fluorescent glare of the mall food court, CEO Seraphina Blake barely glanced at the man wiping soda from her designer heels. To her, he was just another sloppy single dad who couldn't control his kid, just another obstacle between her and a high-stakes board call. She snapped at him publicly, humiliated him in front of his little girl, then strutted away, certain she'd never see him again. Hours later, at the hospital gala, honoring an anonymous benefactor, Seraphina froze mid-speech as the curtain lifted and the nobody from the mall walked on stage as the donor funding her entire wing. The city sprawled beneath autumn clouds, glass towers rising between aging neighborhoods where wealth and struggle lived blocks apart. Blake Health Systems occupied one of those towers, and its crown jewel was Blake Memorial Hospital Stellar Care, if you had the right insurance, endless waiting, if you didn't. The newest addition was still under construction. Scaffolding surrounded what would soon be the Seraphina Blake Children's Wing, designed to treat pediatric patients with the latest technology money could buy. Bright rooms with floor-to-ceiling windows, playrooms painted in cheerful colors, enough space for families to stay overnight. It was ambitious, expensive, and entirely funded by a single anonymous donor who had appeared 18 months earlier with enough money to make the hospital's board weep with gratitude. No one knew who the donor was. Not the board, not the hospital director, not even Seraphina Blake herself. The money had arrived through a foundation with lawyers who specialized in discretion. All they had was a promise on the night of the gala celebrating the wing's near completion. The mystery would be solved. The donor had agreed to appear in person on stage. For Seraphina, that meant tonight had to be perfect. Because beneath the magazine covers and speeches about accessible health care, there was a truth she tried not to think about. She measured people by their productivity, their wealth, their ability to contribute. And somewhere deep in her worldview was a question she'd never quite answered. What separated someone worth knowing from someone merely taking up space? Seraphina Blake was 34 years old and looked like she'd been designed to project power. Tall blonde with hair that fell in controlled waves past her shoulders, she favored dresses that emphasized authority. Today, she wore red, a body-conscious sheath dress with a sharp V-neck paired with a cream trench coat and white heels that cost more than some people's monthly rent. She moved through the world like someone who expected doors to open before she reached them. Usually they did. Her office occupied the top floor of the Blake Health Systems building, all glass and steel and carefully chosen art. She stood at the window now looking down at the city, one hand holding her phone against her ear, while the other tapped an impatient rhythm against her thigh. On the desk behind her folders were arranged in precise stacks financial projections, architectural updates, the gala's minute-by-minute schedule. The board of directors had called 3 times already. Each conversation was the same mixture of praise and pressure. "You've done something extraordinary, Seraphina. The donor trusts you. Tonight needs to go flawlessly. The donor must align with our brand. No surprises." She thought about her sister sometimes, though she tried not to. The memories always came at inconvenient moments. Her sister had been 10 when she got sick, Seraphina barely 14. The local hospital hadn't had the right equipment, hadn't had enough beds in pediatrics. By the time they transferred her somewhere better, it was too late. A doctor had said it to her parents in the hallway, not realizing Seraphina was listening. "If we'd had the resources earlier, if the equipment had been here instead of 2 hours away, her chances would have been significantly higher." Those words had burrowed into Seraphina's brain and never left. Resources, equipment, money. They were the difference between someone living and someone dying. She'd built her entire career on that belief. What had calcified around that belief, though, was something uglier. A certainty that people who didn't have money must not have wanted it badly enough. That poverty was a choice, a failure of willpower. It made her efficient in business and ruthless in judgment. It made her very good at her job, and not particularly good at being human. Her phone buzzed. George Flynn, the hospital director, confirming her schedule. She glanced at the message and allowed herself a thin smile. In 6 hours, she'd stand on a stage and reveal the person who'd made this all possible. In 6 hours, the world would see her not just as a CEO, but as someone who'd changed children's lives. She had no idea that in 6 hours, she'd be standing on that same stage, wishing the floor would open beneath her feet. Across the city, in an apartment complex that had seen better decades, Carter. Henry woke to the smell of something burning. He bolted upright and scrambled toward the kitchen. His daughter Audrey stood on a step stool in front of the stove wielding a spatula like a weapon while smoke rose from a pan. "I wanted to make breakfast," she announced, "but the eggs are being difficult." Carter exhaled and moved to open the window. "How about I help the eggs behave?" Audrey relinquished the spatula with obvious relief. She was 7 years old, small for her age, with blonde hair usually tied back in a ponytail that never quite stayed neat. She had her mother's eyes, light brown with flecks of green, and the same stubborn set to her jaw when she'd decided something was important. "I wanted today to be special," she said, "because you promised we could get my new shoes for the concert." Carter cracked fresh eggs into a clean pan. "I remember. And we will. I checked the budget twice." "What's a budget?" "It's how we make sure we have enough money for the things we need and some of the things we want." They ate breakfast at a small table by the window. The apartment was clean, but spare secondhand furniture walls that needed repainting, a persistent draft from windows that didn't quite seal. But there were drawings taped to the refrigerator, library books stacked on the coffee table, a life that was small but whole. Halfway through breakfast, Audrey asked the question she asked maybe once a month, always careful, always gentle. "If Mom was still here, would she come to my concert?" Carter's chest tightened the way it always did. "She'd be in the front row. She'd probably bring flowers and embarrass you by crying." "I wouldn't be embarrassed." Audrey swirled her milk. "I'd want her to cry." "I know, sweetheart." His wife had died 3 years ago, cancer that moved faster than any of them had expected. She'd spent her last months at Blake Memorial Hospital, and Carter had spent those months watching how the system worked, how the nurses were kind and overworked, how the quality of your room, the speed of your care, the warmth of attention all seemed to correlate with the quality of your insurance. His wife had been lucky decent coverage from her job. But in the waiting rooms and hallways, he'd seen families who weren't lucky. Kids who waited hours for care. Parents filling out financial assistance forms with shaking hands. He'd been a different person back then. Younger, running a medical technology startup that had just been acquired. The buyout had left him wealthy by any reasonable standard. And then his wife had died and none of it had mattered at all. He could have used the money for a bigger apartment, private schools for Audrey, a life that announced his success. Instead, he'd created a foundation, routed the money through lawyers who specialized in anonymity, and funded the one thing that might have saved his wife if it had existed 3 years earlier, a state-of-the-art pediatric wing where no child would be turned away because of their parents' income. He'd named it after Audrey. The foundation, not the wing. The wing bore Seraphina Blake's name because that was the price of getting it built. But the paperwork, the account that sent the money, the legal entity that made it all possible, that was the Audrey Foundation. He'd wanted his daughter to grow up knowing that money was for healing, not for building walls between people. Now he worked at the mall, food court maintenance mostly, cleaning tables, fixing broken equipment, hauling trash. He did it partly because it paid enough to cover their modest bills, but mostly because he wanted Audrey to see that all work had dignity, that being her father was more important than being impressive. Tonight, though, he'd have to step back into that other world. The hospital had been asking for months if he'd appear at the gala. He'd always said no. But recently George Flynn had called and said something that changed his mind. The board is pushing back on some of the foundation's requirements. If you're there, if you put a face to the donation, it'll be harder for them to ignore your conditions. Dad. Audrey was watching him. Are you worried about tonight? A little. Will there be fancy people? Very fancy. Will they be nice to us? Carter thought about that. Some will, some won't. But that's okay. We're not going to impress them. We're going to help kids who need help. Audrey nodded solemnly. Then she brightened. Can we go to the mall now before it gets crowded? Carter checked his watch. Sure, but we take the bus and we stick to the budget. Deal. They got ready. Carter pulling on jeans and a plain t-shirt, Audrey in overalls and rainbow sneakers that were getting too small. Before they left, Carter paused at the shelf by the door where a photograph sat in a simple frame, his wife holding newborn Audrey, smiling tiredly at the camera. He touched the frame briefly. Tonight, he thought. I'm doing this for what you wanted. The mall was already humming by the time they arrived mid-morning. Carter clocked in at the maintenance office, confirmed he'd only need to work until noon, then found Audrey where he'd left her at a table in the food court with a book. She'd kicked off her two small shoes and was sitting cross-legged, utterly absorbed in a story about dragons. The food court itself was a cathedral of cheap consumption. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead bright enough to erase shadows and give everything a slightly washed-out look. A dozen fast food counters formed a horseshoe around a central seating area. The air smelled like fryer oil and cinnamon sugar. Every table was scarred with use, every chair slightly crooked. People ate quickly, juggling shopping bags and crying toddlers and drinks that were always too large. Carter worked methodically, wiping down tables, emptying overflowing trash cans, mopping up spills. It was mindless work that let him think, and right now his thoughts kept circling back to tonight. Walking onto a stage, seeing his name projected on a screen, having cameras pointed at him. The opposite of everything he'd chosen for the last 3 years. He was emptying a trash can when he heard Audrey call his name. She was waving from their table, and he could see she'd bought herself a soda from one of the machines, a huge cup way bigger than necessary, exactly the kind of thing a 7-year-old would choose. He waved back, and she grinned, pleased with herself. That was when Seraphina Blake entered the food court. She was on her phone, deep in what was clearly a tense conversation. Her cream trench coat swirled behind her as she walked, heels clicking against the tile. She looked like she'd taken a wrong turn out of a glossy magazine and ended up somewhere far too ordinary for her tailored perfection. She wasn't looking where she was going, just aiming toward the mall's high-end stores on the far side of the food court, trusting the crowd to part around her. Audrey had climbed off her chair to get closer to the action soda in hand, watching a kid at the next table play a game on a tablet. She didn't see the other child running behind her, didn't anticipate the collision. The running kid bumped Audrey from behind, not hard, just enough to throw off her balance. She stumbled forward, arms pinwheeling. The soda launched from her hand in a perfect arc. Time seemed to slow. Carter's head snapped up. The cup tumbled through air trailing droplets. And Seraphina Blake, phone pressed to her ear, stepped directly into the soda's trajectory. The cup hit first, bouncing off her hip. The contents followed 20 ounces of cold, sticky cola splashing across her white heels, spattering up her legs, darkening the hem of her red dress, speckling her coat. She made a strangled sound, something between a gasp and a curse, and jerked backward. The phone clattered to the floor. For a moment, everyone nearby froze. Then Seraphina's eyes went sharp and furious. "What the?" She bit off the rest barely. Her gaze snapping to Audrey, who stood paralyzed 3 feet away, hands covering her mouth. Carter moved fast, grabbing paper napkins from the nearest dispenser. He was at Seraphina's side in seconds, kneeling, already pressing napkins against her wet shoes. "I'm so sorry. It was an accident. Please let me. Do you even know how to watch your kid?" Seraphina's voice wasn't loud, but it cut. Cold and precise as a scalpel. Carter kept his hands steady, kept wiping, kept his voice calm. "It was an accident. Another child ran into her. I'm very sorry about your shoes. I can cover the cleaning cost." Seraphina looked down at him. really looked, taking in the stained work shirt, the maintenance department logo, the cheap sneakers. Her lip curled slightly. If you can't afford to teach her basic manners, maybe you shouldn't bring her to places like this. Audrey made a small, wounded sound. I'm sorry, ma'am. I didn't mean to. I didn't. Some of us actually have important things to do today. Seraphina retrieved her phone, swiping at the screen to check for damage. Unlike you, cleaning tables at a food court. Carter stood slowly, still holding the useless wad of napkins. Something cold had settled in his chest, but his voice stayed level. You're right that I clean tables. You're wrong that it isn't important work. And you're wrong to talk to my daughter that way. Seraphina's eyes narrowed. You can't even cover your own life. Don't pretend you can cover my shoes. She turned on her heel carefully because the floor was still wet and stalked toward the bathrooms to clean up. Behind her, Audrey started to cry in the particular silent way of children who are trying very hard not to make things worse. Carter immediately crouched beside her, pulling her into a hug. I'm sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to. Hey, look at me. Carter waited until Audrey's wet eyes met his. It was an accident. You are not a bad person because someone spilled something. Do you understand me? But she was so mad, and she said cruel things. People do that sometimes when they're scared or stressed. It doesn't make the things true. Scared of what? She looked so powerful. Carter wiped Audrey's cheeks with his thumb. Sometimes power is just a wall people build so no one can see they're hurting. Around them, the food court had returned to its normal chaos. A few people had watched the confrontation. A teenager in a hoodie had even filmed part of it on his phone. But now, everyone was moving on. Just another small drama in a public place. Forgettable. Meaningless. Carter's phone buzzed in his pocket. A message from George Flynn. Still hoping you'll attend tonight. Board is pushing for changes to the funding structure. Your presence would make a significant difference. He looked at Audrey, who was trying so hard to be brave, and then at the trash bag in his hand. He thought about his wife, about the families in waiting rooms, about the reason he'd given the money in the first place. This wasn't about his ego. It wasn't even about the woman who'd just called him nothing. It was about kids like his daughter who deserved a world that didn't judge them by the bank accounts they were born into. He texted back, I'll be there. Seraphina spent 15 minutes in the bathroom scrubbing cola off her shoes and seething. The dress would need professional cleaning. The coat might be ruined. Everything cascading into chaos on the one day she needed absolute control. Her phone rang. Amanda Collins, the hospital's head of public relations. There's a video from the mall. Someone filmed you having an altercation with someone at the food court. Seraphina's hand stilled. How bad? It's you telling a man he can't cover his own life. And there's a little girl crying in the background. It was taken out of context. Context isn't what trends. Amanda paused. It's not viral yet, just circulating in some local groups. But with the gala tonight, if it picks up momentum, we might have an issue. After Amanda hung up, Seraphina stared at her reflection. Her makeup was still perfect, her hair only slightly disheveled. She looked exactly like what she was, a woman who belonged in boardrooms and galas, not food courts. That man with his stained shirt and his pathetic apologies, his daughter with her two big eyes, they were just noise. She told herself that all the way back to her car. Told herself that as she drove home to change. Told herself that right up until she walked into her penthouse and saw the framed photograph on her mantel, her sister at 9, gap-toothed and grinning, holding a stuffed elephant. A child who'd been scared in a hospital, who'd needed adults to be kind. Seraphina pushed the thought away and went to find a different dress. Blake Memorial Hospital was transforming. By late afternoon, the main lobby had become something from a different world. red carpet running from the entrance to the elevators, lighting that turned the utilitarian space warm and inviting, a string quartet setting up. Caterers moved through with practiced efficiency. George Flynn stood in the center of it all, checking items off a tablet. He was 53, silver-haired, with the calm competence of someone who'd been managing crises for decades. But today, even he looked stressed. The board had descended en masse, each with their own opinions. The donor had requested minimal fanfare, contradicting the board's desire for maximum publicity. And Seraphina Blake had arrived an hour ago in a new dress and a mood that could freeze nitrogen. Dr. Helen Carter found him near the auditorium. She was Blake Memorial's head of pediatrics, with graying dark hair and permanent exhaustion lines around her eyes. "Tell me we're actually going to prioritize patient care with this new wing and not just photo opportunities."
"That's the plan. The donor's been very clear about accessibility requirements. No child turned away based on insurance status. A percentage of revenue from premium services goes to a hardship fund." "And the board agreed to that?"
"They agreed when the check cleared. Whether they'll honor it long-term depends partly on tonight. If the donor is someone with enough public profile to hold them accountable, it'll be harder for them to backslide." In the hospital's executive suite, Seraphina stood in front of a mirror, practicing her smile. She'd changed into an emerald green gown, elegant and understated. The speech was good. She'd worked with a writer, polished every line. It thanked the anonymous donor, outlined the wing's capabilities, promised better outcomes for the city's most vulnerable children. All calculated to generate exactly the right headlines. Amanda Collins sat nearby, scrolling through her phone. The video had spread further than she'd hoped. Not viral exactly, but enough people had seen it that comments were piling up. As long as tonight went perfectly, this would be forgotten by tomorrow. Her phone buzzed. "George Flynn, donor just confirmed he's on site. Ready when you are." Seraphina felt a flutter of nerves. Finally, after 18 months, she'd know who'd funded this entire project. Someone with resources and taste enough to give this much while asking for nothing in return. Probably an older businessman, tech entrepreneur, maybe a trust fund heir. Whoever it was, they'd be someone worth knowing. Someone whose partnership could open new doors. In a family bathroom on the ground floor, Carter Henry was buttoning a dress shirt with hands that wanted to shake. Audrey sat on the closed toilet lid, swinging her legs, watching him. "You look fancy, Dad." "I feel ridiculous." "Mom would say you look handsome." Carter smiled despite himself. The shirt was white, slightly wrinkled, but clean. He'd found a dark blazer that still fit reasonably well. With khakis and the one pair of dress shoes he owned, he looked acceptable. Not impressive, but acceptable. Audrey wore a simple blue dress she'd picked out herself, her hair in a neat braid that Carter had managed after 3 attempts. There was a knock. George Flynn's voice gentle. "Carter, whenever you're ready." Carter took a breath, met his daughter's eyes in the mirror. "You remember what we talked about? This isn't about being fancy. It's about the kids who'll be helped by that wing. And you're going to be really brave and go on stage even though you don't want to." "Exactly. Can I be brave too?" "You already are, sweetheart." They opened the door. George Flynn stood there with a warm smile and a visitor badge. "Thank you for this. It means more than you know." As they walked toward the main lobby, Carter could hear music voices, the gentle roar of a successful event beginning. His stomach tightened. Audrey held his hand, her small fingers gripping tight. And somewhere ahead, Seraphina Blake was preparing to thank a donor she'd never met. The gala's opening was everything the board had hoped for. 200 guests in evening wear champagne flowing the string quartet, playing something elegant. Journalists moved through the crowd with cameras. Local politicians made sure to be photographed near the hospital's leadership. Seraphina worked the room with practiced grace. She shook hands, posed for photos, delivered perfectly calibrated small talk. Several people complimented her dress. One board member made a knowing joke about the mysterious donor. She laughed and said she was simply grateful. At 7:30, the lights in the lobby dimmed and brightened 3 times the signal to move toward the auditorium. The crowd flowed through the doors, filling rows of seats. The stage at the front was simple, a podium with the hospital's logo, 2 large screens on either side, a curtain hiding something at the back. George Flynn took the stage first. He spoke about Blake Memorial's history, its commitment to the community, the lives saved within these walls. Then his voice grew warmer. Tonight we celebrate something extraordinary. 18 months ago, someone we'd never met offered to fund a dream we'd held for years. A pediatric wing that would serve every child regardless of their family's financial situation. A place where the quality of care wouldn't depend on the thickness of your wallet. That person asked for nothing. No recognition, no naming rights, just the chance to make a difference. But they've agreed to be here tonight. And I'm honored to introduce the woman who's been the face of this project from the beginning, our CEO, Seraphina Blake. The applause was warm. Seraphina rose from her front row seat and climbed the steps, her smile radiant, her posture perfect. The spotlights found her. Thank you, George. Thank you all for being here. We stand tonight on the edge of something transformative. Behind me, still under construction, is a facility that will change how we care for the most vulnerable members of our community. When a child comes through our doors scared and hurting, they won't be met with paperwork and obstacles. They'll be met with the best care modern medicine can provide. She spoke about the wing's capabilities, the equipment being installed, the specialized staff. She spoke about her vision for accessible healthcare. It was a good speech, heartfelt enough to seem genuine, polished enough to seem professional. Then she shifted tone building toward the moment everyone was waiting for. But none of this would exist without someone who believed it was possible, someone who understands that healing requires more than good intentions. It requires resources, commitment, and courage. For 18 months, that person has been a mystery to all of us. Tonight, the mystery ends. Ladies and gentlemen, would you join me in welcoming the founder of the Audrey Foundation? The applause began before anyone appeared. Seraphina stepped back from the podium, one hand ready to pull the cord that would reveal the curtain behind her. She was smiling, genuinely excited now. In the back of the auditorium, Carter Henry stood. Audrey squeezed his hand once, quick and tight, then let go. He stepped into the aisle and began walking toward the stage. It took a moment for people to realize who was moving. The applause continued, but faces turned tracking this man in a wrinkled shirt and old blazer walking with quiet determination toward the front. He wasn't what anyone expected. No expensive suit, no confident stride of wealth, no entourage. Just a single father holding himself together through sheer willpower. Carter climbed the stage steps. The lights hit him bright and exposing. One of the screens switched to show his face in close-up, and Seraphina Blake, smiling expectant, turned to welcome him. Their eyes met. The recognition was instant and devastating. Seraphina's smile fractured. Her hand, reaching for the curtain cord, froze mid-air. The blood drained from her face so quickly that someone in the front row gasped. On the screen, her expression was projected huge shock, disbelief, the beginnings of horror. The man from the mall. The man she'd humiliated. The man she'd called nothing. The man whose daughter had cried because of her words. He was standing 3 feet away in a spotlight, and the auditorium had gone completely silent. Carter looked at her without malice, without anger, with something worse, calm certainty that she understood exactly what had just happened. Then he turned to face the audience, and his voice, when he spoke, was steady. My name is Carter Henry. 3 years ago, my wife died in this hospital. She received wonderful care from nurses and doctors who worked miracles with limited resources. But I also watched families get turned away, watched children wait hours for care because they didn't have the right insurance. When my company was acquired, I had a choice about what to do with the money. I chose this. George Flynn, recognizing that something had gone slightly off script but not knowing why, pulled the curtain cord. The fabric fell away, revealing the dedication plaque. Seraphina Blake Children's Wing, funded by the Audrey Foundation, founded by Carter Henry. The applause that followed was thunderous. People stood. Cameras flashed, but Seraphina barely heard it. She stood on the stage, trapped under lights that showed everything, and felt the floor disappear beneath her feet. Fragments of the morning kept replaying Carter kneeling, cleaning her shoes, his daughter's tears, her own words. "You can't even cover your own life." Someone was guiding her toward Carter for a photograph. Her smile was automatic mechanical. Carter's was genuine but tired. Behind them, the plaque gleamed. The ceremony continued. More speeches, acknowledgments. But Seraphina was drowning. Everyone with a phone in this room had probably seen the video. Everyone was making the connection. When the formal program ended, Amanda Collins materialized at Seraphina's elbow. "We need to talk." They found an empty conference room. The moment the door closed, Amanda pulled out her phone. The video just went viral. 500,000 views in the last hour. Screenshots from tonight's side-by-side comparisons. CEO humiliates hospital's secret donor is trending. What do? We can offer a generous settlement. College fund for his kid public apology joint charity project. No, Seraphina's voice was sharp. We're not paying him off. Seraphina, he could destroy you with one interview. I know. That's why we're not going to insult him by trying to buy his silence. Amanda stared. Then what exactly do you suggest? George Flynn knocked. Carter Henry asked if he could speak with you, privately. Seraphina found Carter near a window overlooking the parking lot, hands in his pockets. When she approached, he turned to face her, and his expression was unbearably kind. About this morning, Seraphina started, but Carter shook his head. You don't need to apologize to me. Yes, I do. I was cruel. I said things I had no right to say. You were angry and stressed, and you chose someone you thought was beneath you to pour it on. That's what people do sometimes. The question is what you do next. Seraphina felt something crack inside her chest. I don't know what to do next. You could start by listening. When George tells you which families are being turned away from care, you could ask why. You could use your position to change policies instead of just cutting ribbons. Is that what you want from me? Real change? It's what the kids need from you. They stood in silence for a moment. Then footsteps, small and quick, and Audrey appeared. She saw her father and rushed over, then stopped abruptly when she recognized Seraphina. Her face went carefully blank. Carter put a hand on her shoulder. Audrey, you remember the woman from the mall? Yes. Audrey's voice was tiny. Seraphina crouched down, bringing herself to the little girl's eye level. It took everything she had to hold Audrey's gaze. I owe you an apology. A real one. I was mean to you when you were trying to be careful, and I made you cry when you'd done nothing wrong. I'm very sorry. Audrey looked at her father, uncertain, then back at Seraphina. I already said I was sorry for spilling on you. I can say it again if that helps. The question, so sincere, so willing to shoulder blame she didn't deserve, shattered something in Seraphina. This child was offering to apologize again for an accident while Seraphina had spent the day worrying about her reputation. She had built a children's wing while terrorizing a child. No. Seraphina said, her voice rough. No, sweetheart, you don't need to say sorry ever again. I'm the one who needs to do better. Audrey studied her for a long moment. Then she said, okay, and turned to her father. Can we see the playroom now? Carter nodded, and Audrey skipped off. He looked at Seraphina. She'll forgive you eventually. She forgives everyone. The harder question is whether you'll forgive yourself. After they left, Seraphina returned to Amanda. Call off the PR campaign. No settlements, no spin. Schedule a meeting with George Flynn, Dr. Carter, and Carter Henry. I want to discuss the Foundation's original terms and how we're actually implementing them, not PR implementations, real policy changes. The board will fight you. Then I'll fight the board. I became CEO to save children. Somewhere along the way, I forgot that includes the children whose parents can't afford me. Help me fix that or don't, but I'm done pretending everything is fine when it isn't. Over the next 2 weeks, Seraphina kept her word. She sat in meetings with Carter George and Dr. Helen listening to their proposals. Carter's conditions were clear. A percentage of revenue from premium services would fund a hardship pool. Applications for financial assistance would be reviewed by a committee that included community advocates, not just hospital administrators. The wing's mission statement would explicitly prohibit discrimination based on insurance status. The board pushed back hard. Several members argued it wasn't financially sustainable. Others worried about setting dangerous precedents. Seraphina, who 6 months ago would have agreed with them, now pushed harder. She showed them projections Carter's foundation had run. She reminded them of the publicity they'd gain from actually following through on accessibility promises. She made it clear that if they wanted her as CEO, this was non-negotiable. In the end, they agreed, partly because the viral video had made anything else politically impossible, but partly because Seraphina argued for it with a conviction that surprised everyone, including herself. During those weeks, Seraphina and Carter developed something that wasn't quite friendship, but resembled mutual respect. She attended meetings in jeans and a sweater, not power suits. He showed up with Audrey sometimes. Once, while touring the nearly complete wing, Audrey wanted to see through a window that was too high. Seraphina lifted her without thinking, and when she set the girl down, their eyes met Carter's and Seraphina's with something warm and complicated passing between them. Dr. Helen noticed. One afternoon in the hospital cafeteria, she sat across from Seraphina. "You're different lately. You listen now. There's a difference." Seraphina picked at her salad. "I was so sure I knew what mattered. Facilities, equipment funding. And I was so sure that people who struggled financially were just weak or lazy. It's amazing how much cruelty you can justify when you convince yourself it's actually wisdom." What changed? A 7-year-old girl apologized for spilling soda on me while I just called her father worthless. And she meant it. She genuinely felt bad. How do you come back from being that kind of person? One choice at a time. You're making better ones now. The grand opening of the Seraphina Blake Children's Wing was smaller than the gala, warmer, less polished. Instead of politicians filling the front rows, there were families, parents holding kids who'd need the services, community health workers, nurses. The ribbon cutting was performed by a 10-year-old girl recovering from leukemia, steadied on one side by Audrey Henry and on the other by Seraphina Blake. Carter stood back, letting the children have the moment. But when Seraphina stepped to the microphone, she called him forward. "I learned something in the process of building this wing. I learned that generosity without accountability is just ego, that facilities without accessibility are just monuments to privilege, that I can say I care about children, but if I'm cruel to a child in a mall food court, my words don't mean anything." A ripple went through the audience. Everyone knew the story. Carter Henry didn't just fund this building. He held me accountable to the values I claim to hold. He didn't let me hide behind PR or photo opportunities. He insisted that we change our policies, not just our promotional materials. And because of that insistence, this wing will serve every child who walks through those doors, regardless of their parents' bank account. She turned to Carter. "Thank you for your generosity. Thank you for your patience. And thank you for not letting me off easy when I deserve to be held responsible." The applause was genuine. Carter spoke briefly simply about his wife and his hope that no family would face the barriers they'd faced. Then the doors opened and people flooded in to see the bright rooms, the new equipment, the murals of forests and oceans that made the hallways feel less like a hospital and more like an adventure. Seraphina found herself standing with Carter and Audrey in front of a window overlooking the courtyard. The afternoon light slanted through, turning everything golden. Audrey was chattering about wanting to volunteer here when she was older, about how the fish mural in the hallway looked like something from her favorite book. "She's remarkable," Seraphina said quietly. "She is." Carter glanced at her. "You're doing good work here. Real work. I know it's not easy with the board. It's easier than living with myself if I didn't try." Seraphina hesitated. "I've been thinking about that morning at the mall, about how quickly I judged you based on nothing but appearances. I wonder how many other people I've dismissed the same way." "Probably a lot," Carter said, not unkindly. "But you're noticing now. That's where change starts." Audrey tugged on her father's sleeve. "Can we walk the whole hallway? I want to see all the murals." "Sure, Bug." They started walking, and without planning it, Seraphina fell into step beside them. Down the bright corridor, past rooms that would soon hold children healing from surgeries, fighting illnesses, getting stronger. 3 people who'd met in anger and shame, now walking together toward something better. "In this wing," Seraphina said half to herself, "no child will be just a poor case, and no parent will be just someone who can't afford care. That's the promise, isn't it?" "That's the promise," Carter agreed. Audrey reached out and took Seraphina's hand, casual as breathing. Carter's daughter trusting her enough to hold on. Seraphina felt her throat tighten. They walked together toward the end of the hall where windows let in the afternoon sun, 3 people learning how to be better than they were.